Hello everyone. Today I wanted to do an overview and critique of the event pack Wards and Wardens for CK3 and talk about what it adds to the game in context to the time of its release. Hopefully this video serves to maybe help you decide if you want to buy the DLC if you haven't already, or otherwise just add my thoughts on the release and the future of CK3. So, shall we begin? Wards and Wardens released on August 22nd, 2023, as part of the community event pack vote, where the player base decided on what the next event pack content would involve. The alternative choices available were Love and Lust, and Villains and Vagabonds. I personally chose the Villains one, but in retrospect I think the community made the better choice with Wards. At launch, the DLC also released alongside a free content patch, so as I go throughout this analysis, I'll be judging this DLC on the merits of its free content alongside its paid content. And so, that content shall begin with childhood updates. The namesake of the DLC lends itself to updating the childhood experience of the game, introducing over 100 new childhood events for parenting, guardians, education, regents and activities. At its simplest form, new content to any aspect of CK3 is a positive, and that is extended by how previously there were so few events for children, it would be very easy to mindlessly know each event from memory and just auto-click the best choices. Having more events now breaks up that monotony and should help to keep things a little bit more fresh, such as the coming of age trials for tribal children and the new short form storylines they've added, such as the rock and the ball game events. Despite that, I cannot escape the feeling that though with this increase to childhood variation, other areas in the game with events are starting to feel that monotony much harsher. Even the recently reworked hunt and travel activities, you can very quickly become familiar with all of the pop-up events that will happen during those activities that just feel so repetitive. Speaking of activities, I should mention how the old Meet Peers activity itself has seen some slight improvement, with the aforementioned added events making the activity very valuable for creating great adult rulers. New animations have been added, such as playing with toys and balls, to better set the scene and immersion, and frankly I see this system as feeling a lot more complete and varied than the old decisions of times gone by. There remains only one major issue with Meet Peers for me, and that is the uncertainty if it will ever even take place. When setting up the activity, if nobody shows up, the event automatically fails and you get nothing but stress. You can check the guest list to see who will come and who will decline, but sadly even this interface lies, and some characters who claim their kids will or won't come will do the opposite when they get sent the invitation. I feel like to slightly alleviate this, it wouldn't be so terrible a change to allow randomly generated peasant children to join you for some adventure, as the very limited number of chances to hold Meet Peers you have renders a failed activity due to nobody showing up rather harsh. For those children who aren't succeeding as well comes the Wet Nurse, a new core position for raising children which had its own dedicated dev diary to showcase it off. In order to acquire said nurse, you'll have to find a relevant courtier, which is going to be rather rare, or use the new decision, which feels a little out of place next to its other find position decisions, those being for the physician and the caravan master. It's no concern right now, but I would tentatively inquire as to if the devs maybe consider adding a more generic decision to just hire a specialist, in which then you would be given a list of different jobs you wish to fill, those being the physician, the caravan master, the wet nurse, or even new ones that they haven't added, perhaps such as the antiquarian, which can be difficult to find the relevant aptitude for. But back to talking about the wet nurse herself. The position specialises in two major things: offering a 15% chance of a childhood event each year and adding an illness resistance buff to your children so they don't die so early on. The events with the wet nurse I have found to be good and often make up for her wage when they boost your children's stats, but only rarely. The illness resistance, however, finds little utility beyond the odd chance that your child can sometimes get sickly at an early age. While the position is a nice role to fill and is very thematic for the setting, it feels a little lost when there is no extensive disease mechanics in the game yet, like the spreading of the Black Death. In addition, the childhood survivability rates in CK3 have always been skewed a little too much to the safe side, and unless the amount of kids failing to survive infancy increases, the need for a wet nurse in the game only stretches so far as getting the cool childhood events. Although I guess asking for childhood death to increase is a bit too macabre, isn't it? Sorry, moving on. Influencing your ward's personalities is a great new mechanic that was added to allow you as a guardian to try and give a ward one of your personality traits at the cost of stress. It lends itself really well to combat the seemingly pure RNG outcomes of your children's personalities to at least have some impact on who you or someone else's future heirs could become. I like how the feature doesn't feel too powerful because it does rely on percentage outcomes, so there's no guarantee you're ever going to get the personalities you want, and in addition you're always going to be paying with stress, succeeding or failing. There's going to be a cost. In short, this is a great new feature, and I have no criticism towards it at all. Good stuff. While the DLC is called Wards and Wardens, that may lend itself to make you think that the most fleshed out part of this DLC is to do with children, but to my mind the actual flagship feature that came with this DLC are the universities. A brand new activity has been added to the list in the form of a university visit undertaken by adults to gain skill points, an artifact, and if you're very lucky, an upgraded education trait. Spending about half a year at uni, you can decide to be studious and really strive for your educational upgrade, or take the path of a jackass, drinking, partying, goofing, and reducing the stress that comes from that academic term. Like other activities added with Tours and Touranments, a success bar at the bottom of the activity screen measures your possible outcome likelihoods, with level 4 being relatively difficult unless you force every single best outcome and get a few lucky RNG rolls. To cap all this off, for those of you who have a character with a level 4 education trait before you even go to university, they have now added a level 5 education trait, earned exclusively by the most diligent university students, with huge buffs that easily make up for the effort of trying to attain them. So, this begs the question that all university graduates ask themselves: is it worth the cost? Well, I have no complaints with the activity itself. I think for the utility it serves, the perks it adds, it's a great detour to take when you want to improve a character that's maybe too poor or you just got really unlucky with. That being said, some players may consider the 20-year cooldown between each university visit as too long for the feature to feel that impactful as, let's say, pilgrimages can feel. But in contrast, the far greater rewards that you get from it really do explain the cooldown time. If I was really to push myself for some kind of critique on the universities, I would say I would have liked to have seen a third intent beyond the study hard and goliardic. Perhaps in the form of some kind of discovery branch, maybe having an increase in events involving researching a lost artifact, studying dead ancient cultures or religions like Greco-Roman, or maybe figuring out what exactly is that comet that keeps giving me -1 stability. With only 2 possible intents when you go to university, it did come across to me as a minor missed opportunity, but when you take the whole feature as it was shipped, I think it's a very satisfying and a welcome addition to the game. So we've now reached the point in the video where we've discussed all of the features that were part of the paid DLC, so I'm pretty sure that everything we're talking about going forward was part of the free update, so you should have, so long as you have CK3 base game. We start with the hostage system. With the 1.10 update, rulers are now able to exchange their family, more often than not their children specifically, with other rulers to enact a sort of leverage over them and a consequential peace treaty. If the hostages that are exchanged are children, then there comes some added benefits of you being allowed to oversee the education of those hostages, and to cap that on top, some hostages will even grant you prestige and even renown. Throughout the playthroughs I've done since the release of Wards and Wardens, I found taking hostages to be a good, but strangely off to the side feature The amount of times you can exchange hostages varies depending on how many children you are willing to create and how many children the AI is willing to create. Add on to that how many people will actually want to trade hostages with you in the first place. Something that came as a surprise to me was how the hostage mechanic was actually integrated into a very minor peace deal rework for Warfare, where if you go out on a normal annexing territory conquest, at the end you can demand and offer hostages as part of the peace deal. Due to the prestige and renown bonuses that come from having hostages in your court, I think this has opened up a semi-meta ability where you can do hostage raiding wars, where you declare on a feudal lord, not because you want to annex their territory, just so you can get a white piece and then get a hostage from them as a decent early game reward. So, where does my criticism for this feature lie? Well, overall, while I think it's a good feature, in some ways it feels a little underused, in the fact that it's quite a major event that you can take part in, but once you've done it, there's finite utility beyond the events that you seem to acquire and the educating of those children. In addition to that, the interactions for hostages in the character menu seem to highlight an issue that, while it doesn't exist yet, I feel like it could in the near future. The buttons to offer, demand and exchange come across as a little bit clunky, and I worry that as more features are added to the game, specifically interactions, buttons like these will take up a huge amount of list on the screen. Maybe to get ahead of that, to get ahead of the curve, a minor fix could be that when the time comes, putting hostages as its own menu could work with demand, exchange, etc. interactions being hidden underneath a hostage category. Not an issue yet, but food for thought. So, staying on the topic of hostages, having your court filled with hostages, more often than not children, those hostages will eventually turn 16, and when they do so, they'll want to go home. When this happens, you'll often find that the hostage will become indebted to you for your wonderful hospitality that was in no way self-interested. This comes in the form of giving you a Pepetual Hook on them, which is effectively a reusable weak hook. While the utility of hooks in CK3 is an active debate, I found that if managed correctly, the Perpetual Hook does have some nice features. For example, should you be able to get a hostage who is in line to inherit some land, so an heir of a ruler, then that means that one day they're going to be making bank. Then, using the Golden Obligations perk in the Stewardship branch, you can demand money from your former hostage every 5 years using the Perpetual Hook. This means you can effectively create a hook bank farming simulator where you're raking in interest on your former hostages. While I think on the surface this came across as a somewhat shallow idea to some, I actually like the Perpetual Hook and think that in the future, depending on what kind of updates we see for intrigue for CK3, this could possibly be a really good feature. It just comes down to what are we going to see with intrigue in the future. When I initially saw adoption being added to CK3, I was somewhat apprehensive. Well, no, I saw alarm bells in my head, as it appeared like it was going to work against one of the core challenges of the game. Imagine being a ruler, always going celibate, and then finding one male child to adopt, ensuring that you will never face an inheritance crisis because, well, you can just always adopt when things go wrong. While this strategy is indeed possible, it is nowhere near as prominent as I first feared, because there have been some decent limits to adoption, which seem to have made it not a major feature. You must either have the compassionate trait, have a relevant culture, or have some very limited circumstances like being a frail old woman or the sort. In effect, it's basically a last resort for some failing dynasties who literally have like no other out and they have to get an adoption. And when I thought about it more, it felt like a nice addition for maybe some players who want to play a homosexual game where, you know, maybe they're like a woman and they're a lesbian and they want to marry their fellow woman, but they can't have kids. So adoption is a really nice addition for people who want to use that playstyle. In short, I think it's a good addition. I would, however, like a slight change in that I feel like kids who have been adopted should get a trait which says adopted child, just so that we as players know which children were adopted and weren't, and also to reflect somewhat the fact that I feel in the very heavily inheritance-focused gameplay, a random kid being sort of adopted into a very powerful dynasty probably would get some negative opinions among their fellow family members. In what comes as a breath of relief for me is the Eccentric Trait. A new personality trait, which is the first added since the game's release, might I add, that serves to separate the more serious and realistic events in the game with the more zany and ukuki. To any players out there, such as myself, that found themselves turned off by the serious campaigns being disrupted by silliness, I think the Eccentric Trait will be a welcome addition to their campaigns. Going forward, if you want to play a less serious campaign and get some of the really silly events that you want, then just make sure that you aim to be getting the Eccentric Trait, and vice versa. If you don't want that, stay well far away and you should have a much more serious gameplay experience. So this is just a great addition for giving players the choice to tailor their campaigns to how they want. And in addition, to those people who do want to go with the Eccentric Trait, it's not a bad trait. It gives you some really good, decent lifestyle experience bonuses. I have no complaints. This is just great. The final tidbit feature I want to talk about is how that now events from these event packs, such as Wards and Wardens, will now have the DLC art present in the banners of the events. At first this might come across as a very minor feature, more like a patch note, but I think this is a very clever addition by the devs. So for those of us who remember the Friends and Foes DLC, the actual content from that pack was, let's be real, it was weak, and thus the criticism of that DLC came fast and heavy. I like to think that the devs were not deaf, and they realised that coming into this DLC, a lot of people didn't even know what events were being added by the Friends and Foes DLC, and so they felt like they bought a DLC, and it just had zero content in it. So, to fix that, when any new event from a new DLC shows itself, as well as from previous DLCs, so that includes Friends and Foes, you can be notified of where it came from with this toggleable feature. If nothing else, this will serve to help players know better which content they're getting in DLCs that they've purchased, so they're not going to be raising question marks about, why did I even buy this? And I guess on the flip side, it does give the devs some credit and at least some breathing room to say, when they've made a DLC, these are the events that they came with it, and they can very specifically demonstrate it. Maybe now Friends and Foes won't appear as weak as it once did, but let's face it, it's still pretty weak. So, there it is. Wards and Wardens' main features broken down, briefly discussed, and given some criticism. All that's left to do is determine, is this a good DLC? Well, if you were going to throw me in a dungeon and forced me to give you an IGN level review score out of 10, I think I'd give it a 6. It's good. It's better than average. Practically all of the features I've said have been positive and add to the game, putting aside the wetness. The university fleshes out the game with more to do, although it's rare due to its cooldown. Childhood has been vastly developed with more content for both feudal and tribal players. Adding all that up, I think this is a DLC you should buy. So, why am I giving it a 6? Why not an 8 or a 9? The reason is I struggle to offer more to the scale of this DLC because it's an event pack. It is the smallest form of DLC. Each of its features maintain that small scale from being a small DLC and can leave things like universities or the hooks, for example, even the wet nurses, as feeling like they should maybe have more tacked on as part of a larger DLC. Maybe the wet nurse will feel more applicable when plagues are in the game. Maybe the Pepetual Hook will feel even better with an intrigue DLC. But without that full scope of context, an event pack can feel slightly weaker, even if all of the features within it, relatively speaking, are pretty good. So the reason I wanted to make this video is to say that for me, this is now the baseline between good and bad DLCs. Wards and Wardens is, in my mind, no doubt a good DLC. But if I was to say, I would want every future DLC to be better than this. This is now the benchmark. Anything less than this, such as Friends and Foes, really only comes across as super weak and can be pretty hard for some people to justify the price tag if they don't love CK3 and don't pour hours and hours into it. In addition, it also remains up in the air if these features will see future use and future connectivity with other aspects of the game. As I said earlier, will the Wet Nurse see a redemption arc in a Plague DLC? Will the University see more content with an Exploration DLC? Will the Pepetual Hooks see more utility with a Villains and Vagabonds type DLC? I guess only time will tell. With that, I won't keep you any longer. I'll say thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, as it continues to be a huge motivator for me to keep making videos. Also, comment your thoughts on my ramblings and rantings, as Paradox is very receptive to their audience's critique, good and bad, and I think they deserve some respect for that. And anyway, I enjoy reading what all of you have to say. Alright, I'm gonna go now. Thanks again, and bye.